Welcome to another episode of The Agents Angle, the show that surveys the football landscape and sometimes the frenzy of the transfer window, where the creature referred to as a football agent is known to prowl. With me, Jonathan Booker.
Me, Peter Paleologos. And in this episode of The Agents Angle, we're returning to Africa, and this time to the north of the continent, where our guest is not only a licensed agent, but also the president of the Moroccan Football Agents Association.
And at the tail of many a transfer window, we will also be looking at release clauses once again and the problems they can cause, as well as the naturalisation of players to represent national teams.
All that to come on this episode of The Agents Angle.
So as many club execs, players and managers take a breath from a frenetic, often caffeine-fueled month of activity with the closing of many mid-season transfer windows, many agents can also now have a rest. If only that was true. Because as we've hopefully highlighted here on the Agents Angle over the last year or so, many agents will simply continue to work rather than have the luxury of disappearing off to a beach somewhere. Whether it be supporting clients who've moved in this window, those who have planned transfers fall through, or now find themselves as free agents. For many agents, there is absolutely no let-up. Plus, many agents and their clients will be planning for the next transfer window, and even beyond that, in fact.
You mentioned coffee there, Jonathan. I do love my coffee now. Yes, it's window to window to window planning for many agents. Now they'll be obviously starting to evaluate opportunities for their players going forward and also assessing their players' current contractual status. I think also a lot of agents now for the next window will be looking what clubs need in terms of requirements and also what budgets are on offer, because there's been movement in budgets, not always high budgets in a lot of clubs. But the other thing I noticed this window, before we get further into the program or the podcast, is there's been a lot of loans. It's not just transfers during this January window. It's some big loans happening, Jonathan.
And despite what many may think, a large proportion of the deals that go through in the transfer window don't just happen in a matter of days. Many agents work for several weeks, if not months, before a transfer or contract is finalised, and then many months thereafter on making that transfer, transaction or deal work for all of those involved. And sometimes, despite an agent's best efforts and intentions, things just don't work out as they intended or indeed planned. And these stories don't emerge overnight after the transfer window is closed. That is unless someone is trying to make excuses, shift blame, or is just upset at a transfer falling through. So from this transfer window, we will have to wait for the dust to settle to see what stories emerge, hopefully with greater detail, so that we can have a closer look. And one such source of failed transfers, or disputes over a transfer, is increasingly down to release clauses. And of course, when it comes to stories on release clauses, we have the infamous one where Arsenal were reportedly bidding just £1 over a £40 million release clause for Luis Suarez when he was at Liverpool. But we have one pretty recent story involving a release clause, not for a player this time, but a manager. And of course, agents are now under the authority of FIFA in representing managers and coaches under the licence, where things don't seem to have gone quite to plan for those involved in this affair.
Yes, we'll be talking about that recent story on a coach or manager, as you said, Jonathan, but I think we maybe relive a little bit the Arsenal's attempt to sign Luis Suarez for over 40 million plus £1. It's a notorious transfer failure in football history, in deal making. It's a failed bid. It actually was a bid to initiate negotiations, and it wasn't the final offer. That's the way it was sort of described by the transfer negotiator at the time, Dick Law, I believe. And it was an issue of a clause misrepresentation, a release clause misrepresentation, where Arsenal believed Suarez contract required Liverpool to discuss if there was an offer on the table by 40 million plus £1. It was not a buyout clause or something like that. So in terms of a release clause back 10, 12 years ago, that's one that didn't work out. But let's go to the story right now. It's the Martin and Selmy negotiation. This is another recent release clause backfire, although I think Porto will get their Argentinian coach. This is about Martin Selmy. He's an Argentinian coach, and Porto wanted to exercise the release clause and sign that coach from Cruz Azul from the Mexican League, Liga MX. So it was a dispute over the release clause. Cruz Azul initially agreed a fee about 3 million, but later demanded 5 million, arguing that Porto was not an elite club. It's a bit vague how this story goes, but I'll just go through some of the points here. That Cruz Azul, after deciding to change their mind, didn't want to negotiate, and Alsemi, who turned up at Porto ready to sign, they wanted to take legal action. That's Cruz Azul. FC Porto have a conflicting claim here. They say they settled the release clause, but Cruz Azul denied it. Now, there was a breakdown in talks between the two, Porto and Cruz Azul, and the media speculation around it went like wildfire. Porto have assured Anselmi, the Argentinian coach, I'll get it over the line. They will pay the necessary fee to move to Portugal. Now, why was this complicated? Because there was 4 release clauses in Anselmi's contract. That's why it was complicated. Now, I'll just go through a couple of them. It was 3 million if Alcemi signed for La Liga clubs or Mexican or Argentinian clubs. 2.5 million if he signed after 2025. There was a third clause, 6 million plus value-added tax if he signed for a team in the Mexican Football Federation or owned by a Mexican football group. So that was a bigger fee. And then 5 million plus VAT for all other clubs, including FC Porto. But if you look at it, they had 4 different categories. And that's why Cruz Azul said, now it's 5 million, all other clubs, FC Porto had to pay 5. Interesting that this contract did not include reduced fees for elite clubs or anything of that nature, but it was the way the clauses were structured. So they had a categorization. And that's important, I think, when you are looking at release clauses. Just in general, before we go into a bit more detail later, what is a release clause, but they're becoming quite popular because they set transfer fees. I know in the Australian A-League, for younger players, a lot of clubs are bringing in a release clause, while Japanese teams are starting to look at this because they've sold a lot of players. We've had a 90% increase in the number of transfers from Japan into Europe in the last 5 years. They don't sell their players at the highest fees. So release clauses, at least in this part of the world, are gaining traction, Jonathan.
Now, I've said before, release clauses are something that I support and I'm quite a fan of, but that doesn't count for everybody in football, and quite a few people don't like release clauses. I can think of a few managers I've hotly debated these matters with when negotiating player contracts. But as I've said before, done right, whether for the players or indeed coaches and managers, such clauses should provide clarity, if not some certainty, for all of those involved, as they do in many professions, although worded differently, with regards to employment contracts for talented people who are very valuable to their employers. However, I have heard of and seen some shockingly vague release clauses, and these aren't solely the fault of agents or clubs, but quite worryingly, often the legal advisors who are arguably at fault. Don't get me wrong, good lawyers are invaluable, and football is understandably reliant on good legal advice. But we have had this debate on several occasions, Peter, that the cynic in me thinks some lawyers are deliberately vague in writing clauses, not just release clauses, either to be advantageous with terms or even a loophole to favour their clients, which is totally understandable. But more worryingly, this could also possibly create a problem down the line so that they or a colleague can swoop in and help resolve it. On the clock, of course. So, from an agent's perspective, agents also need to be competent here, if not pretty hot when it comes to reviewing such clauses and not solely rely on others to do it. And we've covered release clauses before on the agent's angle, way back on episode 3, which was pretty much 18 months ago now. So I think listeners would benefit from listening back to that episode. But can you quickly do a whistle-stop summary of some of the aspects of release clauses and just some of the key points agents need to be aware of when working with release clauses?
Yes, Jonathan. I mean, we've covered a bit of release clauses previously and some other clauses which I'll mention in this summary, but this is not legal advice. This is a disclaimer. We're not providing here legal advice. But in terms of a release clause, just simply what it is it's a clause in a player's contract with a club or coaches, because we've just discussed that article that coaches now and managers have also got release clauses. Even sometimes football directors will, Jonathan, as you know best. A release clause dictates that a club has to sell a player when it receives a bid over a certain amount. Now, that clause may have timing restraints. It may also have other conditions. It could be not just a certain amount, it could also be a release clause if the club is relegated or doesn't qualify for the Champions League, for instance. The release clause sets out if the conditions are met, then the player can leave, typically, or discuss opportunities with the interested new club as per the contract. So always with a release clause, a lot of it has a transfer fee or an amount, and it's stipulated as a minimum that needs to be met before it is triggered. Now, we know that these are qualifying conditions in this, and sometimes the release clause may be that it only applies to certain transfer windows. It might not apply in the first transfer window that it's available, it could be the second, so that could be part of it. It also, if it's well drafted, and these are what agents need to be aware of, will automatically require a club to accept an offer of a predetermined contractual amount that's expressed in the contract on the offering club. That is a good one because a good drafting, and you mentioned lawyers, but agents need to be across this too. You need to have a trigger that's compulsory. It can't be something that, oh, you will consider it. It's a little bit vague. It has to be very, very specific. And if that minimum amount is stipulated, then the contract can be triggered and the purchasing club can come in and put a deal or start a negotiation, or at least at a minimum, the player is entitled to speak to that club. And an old one, which was quite long ago, was Joe Allen from Swansea to Liverpool. And we all know, and people who followed that deal, that trigger in relation to that release clause, it can only be if it came from one of five clubs, if the offer came from one of five clubs, which included Liverpool. Now, with previous episodes that you mentioned, Jonathan, we've covered in this podcast other types of clauses like the sell-on clause, the buyout clause, the buyback clause, and the loan clauses, which are with or without obligation. But these are some of the key points for agents, just to wrap it up, Jonathan. Firstly, make sure you have clarity. You negotiate the specific trigger in the contract schedule. If it's event, it's the amount. Is it relegation? Is it qualifying for European Champions League? Or is it you can only go to certain clubs because the current club does not want you to go to certain other clubs? That has to be stipulated as a trigger. Definition. I like definition sections. We just talked about Anselmi and the Porto deal from Cruz Azul. If they had a definition section to say these are the elite clubs and that means 5 million applies. This is smaller clubs, that means 3 million. If you've got a definition section, it's always a good idea to define what you mean by big club or Champions League club or whatever. Probably the most important, this is the third key point, clear amounts must be stipulated. But the agent also has got to be across this, not to price their player too high for the next transfer and try to negotiate it down. And the fourth one, because there's a bit of an intermingling between clauses, sometimes we forget this. A lot of clubs, when they bought a player, they might have negotiated sell-on clauses with the former club. This also affects the transfer or the release clause going down the track. So you need to be across that because it's not just the player and the club negotiation. Remember that it's also a transfer agreement when a release clause is executed. So there's some 4 or 5 points to think about as an agent. And you may need a lawyer, and I would say good clauses are drafted by good lawyers, as you say, Jonathan, but be across these points. The key is to be very specific, very definitive. Even if it's a bit verbose, make it clear that this is what it means.
And of course, transfers, negotiations, and transactions involving such things as release clauses get even more complicated when you throw in different languages, cultures, laws, and ultimately those different interpretations that you spoke about, Peter, which is prevalent on international transfers and agents working across borders. And on the agents angle, we've had guests from all over the world, but one region we haven't had a guest from yet that has seen particular success in producing playing talent is North Africa. We obviously have the likes of Mo Salah of Egypt, and one country that has experienced quite a bit of success through its national team more recently is Morocco. But Morocco, if not North Africa, is a market that I would be confident in saying many agents have had little or no dealings with. In fact, in my time in the agent world, I could probably count the North African players. clubs and agents I've dealt with on my fingers alone.
Yes, Jonathan, Morocco is a very intriguing market for players, especially obviously after the last World Cup and the national team did so well. Obviously, they've got the World Cup hosting with Portugal and Spain. And I don't know if you've seen the graphics on that huge stadium. I believe it's in Rabat at their building. It's a mega stadium, over 100,000 people. And there are big clubs in Morocco, just like there are in Egypt, etc. In Morocco, there's Wydad and Raja Casablanca, huge clubs. And in Rabat, FAR Rabat. So that's big football culture. And also, which we will talk about with our guests, which I'm about to introduce, they've got the Moroccan diaspora, and a lot of players are coming from that. And from there, today we are delighted to welcome Mohamed Rezki to the show, a multilingual professional fluent in Arabic, English, Portuguese, and French, essential languages in the world of sports agents. Mohamed brings a wealth of experience to the table. He is a director of RMC Legal Sports in Casablanca, Morocco, and XO7 Sports Management in Portugal. Mohamed is a licensed FIFA football agent and FA Football Association football agent as well. He has an MBA in sports management from Real Madrid University. Mohamed is currently serving as the president of the Football Agents Association of Morocco. He has extensive experience in the football industry across North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. His expertise spans sponsorship, TV rights, and marketing, quite a mix. So, Mohamed, welcome to the Agents Angle.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'll just start with your journey, Mohamed. Can you briefly share with us your journey into the world of football agency and what inspired you to become a football agent?
I was living in Brazil from 2005 to 2007, and I had the chance to work in a team, but not as a football agent. Then I back to Morocco. And once I back to Morocco, I see the Moroccan league don't have any Brazilian player. So I told myself, how come the Brazilians are everywhere except in Morocco? So I challenged myself to say, okay, I will start bring Brazilian to Morocco. Then I was lucky to sign a player. I didn't know a lot about the football agency. I studied, then started like this until now, a journey from 2008 until now. And I am lucky to have this journey. I am lucky to have this change. Because if I could repeat it from the beginning, I will never get a success here in North Africa as I had, and I'm very grateful.
And football agency brings with it a lot of challenges. And with a focus on North Africa and in particular Morocco, what challenges do agents face there when compared to agents in Europe, South America, and elsewhere in the world, would you say?
An agent in North Africa, and especially in Morocco, face a pretty unique set of challenges. Unlike in Europe and South America, where the agencies are well-structured business with clear regulatory frameworks, many agents here operate informally. They don't register companies or work under a solid system, which make it difficult to maintain professionalism or build credibility, both locally, internationally. Another big challenge we face is access to global scouting networks and resources. Compared to the Asian in more developed market, it's harder for us to compete when it's come to placing player aboard. But there is a thing, the Moroccan footballers, recent successful on international stage are changing the narrative. Those achievements are opening the door for greater collaboration and creating a foundation for more structural and professional ecosystem for the Asian in the region. So while the challenges are real, the potential for growth, I think, is bigger.
And from your own perspective and your own experience, can you share with us an example of a particularly challenging or interesting situation you've had as an agent and how you've resolved it, whether it be involving a Moroccan player moving overseas, a Moroccan club involved in recruiting a player, or even just a domestic agent matter in Morocco itself?
I will tell you about my first transfer. For me, it was really interesting. Like I told you, I arrived to Morocco from Brazil. I see that no Brazilian here. So I have an partner in Brazil. The same partner sent me a player. He told me he's in the plane. You don't need to be his agent. Just take him to the hotel. The club is waiting for him. So after a lot of hesitation, I took to the hotel of the club. I arrived there. And I called the sport director about the player. He told me, we are not expecting any players. So I took a player. He's now is under my responsibility, how I'm going to resolve the situation. So I told him, please, can you call the coach or assistant where I can get a small talk with him? Then after that, come the assistant. He told me he's from Brazil. Yes. Which language he speak? I said, he speak Portuguese. See, don't think he will be interesting for us here, as we speak only Arabic and French, little English. So at that moment, the coach heard my conversation with him and told me, okay, come. So we get 2 minutes of exchanging, me and the coach. And he told me, he will not go in the hotel with us, but bring him for a test tomorrow. So I have to arrange him in a hotel where to stay, everything. Then he go to the test in first day, second day. Then he got a game. He scored. He was a striker. He scored the first game test he had. Then they called me, okay, want to sign him. So at the end, this player, it was my first transfer. His name, Jefferson Luis Escher. He is maybe the foreigner that stayed most years in Morocco. He stayed like 8 or 9 years. He played in many teams. He started with Kaukab Marrakech, then he played in Wydad Casablanca, then in Maghreb Fes. And with Maghreb Fes, he won the Cup of Morocco, the Confederation Cup of Africa. Then he won the Super Cup of Africa. So somehow for me, it was really interesting. As is my first transfer, I remember it. And it was very challenging as I don't know nobody, I don't know nothing. And I had to find solution and I made it. And at the end, he made also a big history in Morocco, this player.
And with that and all the challenges that you face as an agent, you must be what we say a glutton for punishment, because you're also president of the Football Agents Association of Morocco. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, not least the association's objectives and how it supports its members?
Our association named UNAS, Union Nationale des Agents Sportifs, and we made it in 2018. And we had a clear strategic vision for advancing the profession of football agent in Morocco. Our main objective include professionalizing the profession by establishing high standards and structured frameworks for our members. That's the most important point for us. And we support the agent through regular training program, tailored legal resource, and collaborative network to help them navigate sometimes a complex environments. Also, building a strong relationship with Moroccan football institutions, particularly the Royal Moroccan Football Federation, to create a constructive and lasting synergy that benefits the football ecosystem. This means we are a fully integrated agent into the football ecosystem in Morocco and fostering collaboration with stakeholders, including clubs, federation, and other actors. And this ambition can only be achieved with active cooperation with Moroccan institutions, especially Royal Moroccan Football Federation, to build a prosperous future for the Moroccan football and its key players.
And on that positive note of cooperation, if not collaboration, it's widely recognised, and also we've spoken about it several times here on the agents angle, that agents and agent associations don't necessarily agree on everything, and there's been a bit of a fractured relationship over time. In terms of yourself and your association, the Moroccan Football Agents Association, do you collaborate with other agents associations? And I mean, not just in terms of North Africa, but Africa as a whole and also globally. And how important do you think that cross-border collaboration is for football agents?
UNAS, our association, we are already a member of FIFA, I think from 2020. We've been present in all the panels, and even they invited me, I think, in 2021 or 2022 to participate about the FFAR in London. Then lately, we started to finalizing a vision South-South partnership. We are starting with signing and collaboration with the Cameroon Football Agents Association, then Senegalese Football Agents Association. This kind of collaboration is important because allow us to share experience, resource, and best practice. Sure, by working together, we are creating opportunities, not just for players, but for Asian as well, and laying the groundwork for a more unified and professional approach to football agency in Africa. Those partnerships are about more than just a networking. They are building a sustainable ecosystem where African Asian can thrive both locally and internationally.
Mohammed, you mentioned some of the other African football agent associations, and you also mentioned EFA, which is, for a lot of our listeners, the European Football Agents Association. In terms of Morocco, it's come a long way, football. How are football agents now perceived by Moroccan clubs and the federation? Has it changed the last 4 or 5 years compared to when you started as an agent?
I need to mention something. When we created our association back in 2018, the first person to welcome us is the president of Royal Moroccan Football Federation, Mr. Fawzi Lakja. I have to take a moment to thank him for all effort he had made to develop the Moroccan football. He always shown great support for our initiatives and welcomes us warmly every time we had the opportunity to meet. We've also built cordial relationship with key player in football community like FIFA Pro Morocco. In the fact, we are currently working on finalizing a partnership with them, which is an exciting step forward for both sides. Those relationships are crucial because they help us align our effort and advocate for better conditions for player and agent alike. As for how Asians are perceived in Morocco compared to other countries, I'd say it's work in progress. In some cases, there are still a bit of misunderstanding about the role we play. Some see Asians as unnecessary intermediaries, while others recognize the value we bring in connecting players to opportunities both domestically and internationally.
We ask the next question pretty much to all our guests. If you were to describe the football agency world in one word, what would it be and why?
I will say challenging. Challenging. I choose that word because being an agent means constantly navigating a landscape that's full of obstacles and also opportunities. Whether it's managing complex negotiation, dealing with unexpected situation, or bridging the gap between the players, the club, and other stakeholders, every day bring a new test. But it's precisely those challenges that make the job so rewarding. You have to be adaptable, persistent, and always ready to think outside the box. It's not just about talent management, it's about also problem solving and making things happen, even when the odds are against you. For me, the challenge are what keep this profession exciting and push me grow both personally and professionally.
Ahmed, you mentioned earlier FFAR, which is the FIFA Football Agent Regulations. How has the FFAR been received by members of your agent association and generally in North Africa by agents, by players, clubs, football authorities in Morocco? Has the FFAR provided changes in Morocco the way agency business worked or the roles between agents, clubs, and players?
At the first, we were genuinely excited when the new FFR regulation were introduced. We saw it as an opportunity to bring more structures to the professions and open door for the young generation by creating new opportunities in the football agency. However, as we delved deeper into the details, our enthusiasm quickly turned to disappointment. One of the biggest issues we found was the cap on the Asian commissions. While it might make sense in some contexts, but in African reality is simply unworkable. But what I think even more concerning that here in Morocco, many players and clubs aren't even aware of those new regulations. And the role of FFR hasn't been effective in its implementation in Morocco are facing some serious compliance. And so far, we are working on it and we are trying to talk about the new FFR, the new changes, meeting with federation, with league, with clubs, with players. Also in April 28 until 30, African Football Agents Association. We are organizing with them, UNAS, a big event here in Morocco, the third one for African Football Agents Association, to talk more of FFR. And we are organizing it in Rabat, and you are welcome to be part of it.
Thank you for the invitation. We've heard that Brazilian agents, and there was a court case as well, were very upset that the FFAR, or the exam, I should say, the license exam wasn't in Portuguese. We've heard from a lot of African agents, especially in smaller countries, that the fees were too high. So there's always been concerns about the FFAR. In terms of Morocco and North Africa, are there any specific changes you would like to see in the current FFAR framework?
For the exams here in Morocco, we didn't have any problem. We were very happy because our federations helped us to be in the exams without fees. They supported us with internet, with the laptops, and we don't pay nothing. But I'd like to see that FFR, to better address the unique need of Asian in Morocco, in North Africa, first and foremost, the cap on the commission need to be reconsidered. In our region, where transfer fee and contract often operates on a smaller scale compared to Europe and other markets, the current limits simply don't reflect the reality of the profession. Another significant concern with FFR regulation for us is the provision allowing players to negotiate transfer directly with the club, even if they have signed an exclusive representation contract with their agent. While this might make sense in urgent or exceptional situation, it creates a loophole that could easily be abused. For agents, this is a serious issue. We invest time, effort, and resource into representing players, building their career, negotiating on their behalf. When players can simply sidestep those agreements, it disrupts the trust and creates uncertainty in the profession. It's not just about protecting the agent, it's about maintenance of the integrity of contract as a whole. There is also a need for better education and communication about those regulations toward the players and the club.
Now, I want to focus on Moroccan football, in particular the players. We've seen incredible success recently, and we've seen also a lot of Moroccan players from the diaspora, born outside of Morocco, come into the national teams. And really, Moroccan players have excited football, including agents. What impact has had on agents, whether positive or negative, and have the agents, especially the Moroccan agents, played a role in identifying and recruiting Moroccan players, especially from the diaspora outside Morocco, to represent the national team? Has the Federation asked for assistance from Moroccan agents to identify players from outside?
The first recent success of Moroccan football is truly a testament of a vision and leadership within the sport. I can say a lot of credit goes to the president of the Moroccan Football Federation, and they created a cohesive environment that brought together players trained in Morocco and those born and raised abroad, forming a unified and competitive team. And let me tell you about something. In quarterfinal and semi-final of the World Cup against Portugal and also against France, the 11 that started those two games, 5 or 6 from them, they were issued from Morocco. They were from the clubs, from academies, especially Academy Mohamed 6. And those 5, 6 players, their first transfers was made by a Moroccan football agent. The first step for them to go to Europe. Then the other side, the Moroccan that living outside Morocco or born outside Morocco, the Moroccan Football Federation created a big scouting perspective that we have a scout in every countries in Europe. So any Moroccan that is playing there, they have already the eyes. And also we are helping on this to catch the best of them to try to make them in contact with Moroccan Royal Federation.
Mohamed, obviously with that success, it's raised the profile of Moroccan football. But in your view, has it also raised the demand and also the value of Moroccan players, whether it be looking to recruit players for the European leagues or leagues elsewhere around the world?
The recent success of Moroccan football has had a huge impact on the demand on the Moroccan player globally. But this success didn't just happen. It started years ago with the creation of the Mohamed 6 Academy in Rabat, which has become a real model for football development in Morocco. This academy has produced incredible talent and set the stage for what's possible when you invest in youth development. After the World Cup, also, the federation took things further by seeking sponsor partnership to create more football academies. And the idea is simple: improve the level of football locally and open up more opportunities for Moroccan players to shine abroad. This is where our association, UNAS, play a key role. As an agent, we are here to guide those young talents, helping them navigate their career and seize the opportunities that come their way. And by creating those academies, we will be expecting more players, Moroccan, to be abroad. That is what is our expectation and our dreams that we are working to.
Around the globe, it's been noted that it seems that there's a shift from agents representing players to more so representing clubs. But what role do agents play mainly in Moroccan football? Is it primarily player representation, or are you actually also seeing a shift to agents working more for clubs in terms of recruitment and export of players?
In Morocco, agents play a mix of roles, but primary focus is on player representation. We are here to guide players, help them navigate their careers, and connect them with the right opportunities, whether locally or internationally. That said, agents also play an important role when it comes to working with clubs, especially in recruiting and sales. We are often the link between the club and the players. So it's really a balance. On one hand, we are advocating for player and managing their career, and then other we are helping clubs find talent they need. And both aspects are crucial to the development of Moroccan football. As agents, we are at the center of making those connections happen.
As we've already spoken about, you've got experience of working in other nations, Brazil, Portugal, so on and so forth. How would you, from an agent's perspective, compare the landscape of Moroccan domestic football to that of other leagues, not only in Africa, but around the world?
For an Asian perspective, Moroccan domestic football, especially our league named Al Botola, has made impressive progress. We are second in Africa and ranked 28th best league in the world by the IFFHS. So compared to other African league, is definitely one of the strongest in terms of structures, competitiveness, and the quality of talent coming through. On a global scale, the league doesn't have the same commercial appeal or global visibility as European or South American leagues. Budgets are more limited, which can make it harder to attract and retain top talents. But what is exciting that the Moroccan football is moving in the right directions. Investments in infrastructure and youth development and the recent success of Moroccan's club and the national teams are all raising the league profiles. For the agents, the Botola is an excellent platform to develop local players and showcase their talents for the world. It's a league with great potential, and it's believed it will continue to grow in importance.
Mohamed, if you were to offer any advice to an agent who hasn't operated in Morocco or maybe one of the other major North African leagues, whether working with a Moroccan club or trying to move a player to Morocco, what advice would you give them, and what are the key things they need to do or to be aware of, whether culturally or regulatory? What advice would you give?
If I had to give advice to an agent who is new to working in Morocco, I'd say the first thing is to rely on local expertise. Morocco and North Africa has its own ways of doing things. There are cultural things here, for example, relationship, trust are at the core of everything. In Morocco, these aren't just about the contract. And it's important to take a time to understand how clubs operate here in Morocco and what players value. Communication and trust are the key. So building strong connection with clubs, players, and even their family is essential. We here better don't rush the process. Success here often comes from patience and persistence. Finally, we need to keep in mind that we need to align all these things with the Moroccan regulation. And talking about Morocco is just an example how to do the things in North Africa. Normally, it's this way.
Now, we always also ask this question, Mohamed, and we really appreciate your time. If you had one wish for the football agent industry in Morocco and worldwide, what would it be and why?
If I had one wish for the football agent is united. Let's unite worldwide. I'm telling from here for the Asian, I'm giving the message, let's unite. Because once we are united, we can reach our goals all together worldwide with the regulations, with the respect for them to take us seriously. Together, we can create a much better environment for everyone and can collaborate, share knowledge, support one another. And it will allow us to tackle challenges more effectively and achieve common goals like improving the regulation, protecting players' interests, creating more the opportunities in the industry. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, to see players and the sport up. So working together isn't always easy, but I think the key is to build a more professional and respected industry. And that's why I choose the word united. Let's unite agents.
I like that, Mohammed. I'll mimic that message. And that's, I would say, part of the philosophy of our podcast as well, Jonathan. But Mohammed, I really appreciate you coming on. We really wanted to hear the Moroccan perspective. It's an exciting part of the world. North Africa as well is very exciting and going forward. Also, we know the World Cup will be hosted, and we can see the plans for that new stadium, which will be over 100,000 people. Really exciting times for Moroccan football. And from me and Jonathan, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for receiving me. And it was a nice discussion about everything. Thank you.
Well, Peter, that was an ending on that interview I wasn't expecting, but I think it's fair to say I couldn't agree much more with Mohamed than that when he said about unity with the agents. Because, as you rightly said, that's been pretty much the mantra of ourselves throughout this podcast right from the very start, many, many moons ago. And I think it's fair to say that quite a few people have stressed the importance of unity between the agents and notably the agents associations over FFAR. Because there have been efforts made to unite, to find the areas that they actually agree on, and it seems to have been shunned thus far. But what we have to be mindful of, do they all want any form of unification, or are there elements of self-interest going on behind the scenes? Because we know an offer of mediation, for example, has been offered to find that middle ground, and thus far it has been ignored. And I'm going to judge people on that matter of unification based on their actions rather than their words.
Yes, it was great to see our guest Mohamed Rezki. Obviously, he's the president of a very important agent association, but he also covered key issues, including how Moroccan Football Agency work, the talent management process, cultural issues in that part of the world. Our relationships are very, very, very important. But also, he amplified how they work with the Federation and also FIFA Pro Morocco, which we haven't heard much about. So, some really interesting insights, Jonathan.
But as I said before, there's no doubt Morocco and other North African nations are producing arguably more footballing talent than ever before. And one thing we touched upon in our chat with Mohamed was the recruitment of players who are eligible to play for the Moroccan national team, but not necessarily born in Morocco. And I don't think I'm being unfair in saying that this recruitment strategy has played a key part in the success of the Moroccan national football team, and all power to them for that. The Moroccan Association seems to have done this legitimately, but that hasn't been the case with all nations historically. As I recall, one Middle Eastern nation many years ago recruited several South Americans, making them national citizens, and then they could go and play for that country's national team, which of course led to FIFA stepping in at the time and tightening up regulations for the naturalisation and eligibility rules for players playing for national teams.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting area, and sometimes agents are involved in this because it can benefit their players. But the current FIFA naturalisation rules came out of a lot of things that were happening, players changing passports and trying to be naturalised for certain teams. and what I like to call the rules governing the procedures of the Players Status Committee of 2020. And some CAS law looked at all this, and they're the latest rules. And they pretty much brought the process forward of how players are naturalised in order to represent other countries. I'm going to do a shout out to a friend of mine, I would say, who also wrote an article in the Football League, which is the International Football Law Journal. And that's James Kitching. He wrote a very good article on how things have changed in the naturalisation space and what are the current rules. And I don't want to go into the technical because I think that is probably not something our listeners are looking for, but I can give a little bit of a synopsis, as it's James Kitching wrote a very good article and I had a look at it, and I think he sets out the core principles which are very important. The core principles about eligibility and naturalisation of players, and this is what FIFA bases their rules on, is about objective measurement. So looking at everything objectively, all the facts, but also the core principles of these new rules that came in 2020, I would say, is the equal treatment of all member associations, that there has to be a genuine link between the player and that member association or football association, if we can call it that. Avoid excessive severity or hardship, especially if someone may be moving from a country for other reasons. Preventing abuse, like nationality shopping, so shopping around to go to a country and play for them so you can build up your prestige, avoiding those sort of abuses. And protecting the sporting integrity of international competition, which is very, very important, as we know. Now, for players to assume or change a new nationality, they must meet certain residency requirements. It is based on their age, but let's more talk about players over 18, which I think is a space that most agents probably will be dealing with in terms of change of nationality. If a player wants to change national teams, they must observe Article 8 of these regulations, and there's a 3-year waiting period since their last appearance for their first national team. So it's a bit of a waiting period. I will go into specifics, but I will go into a very interesting article of what's happening out there. We know that many youth players are changing allegiance. We see a lot of French trained players or players trained in France playing for African teams. Or we've seen even in your part of the world, the regulations. These regulations allow, for example, some of Ireland's future stars who may have represented at youth level, Jack Grealish or Declan Rice comes to mind, switching allegiance to England. So that's something that's happening with these naturalisation rules. I will go to an article, and it's actually an article that relates to one of our former guests from Malaysia, Effendi Jagan Abdullah, who talked about naturalised footballers. And this is happening a lot in Asia. There's an article about stop spreading rumours about naturalised footballers. The fashion here in Asia is a lot of countries are looking for heritage players. I'll just go straight into the article now. Football agent Effendi Jagan Abdullah urged the public to stop spreading baseless naturalisation rumours about European-based footballers with alleged Malaysian ties, because a lot of these players who were mentioned in the social media or the speculation have denied any connection to Malaysia, and it's embarrassing. Someone like Joshua Brownhill from Burnley says he doesn't have any connection to Malaysia. Also, Isaac Hayden from Newcastle confirmed he has no Malaysian heritage and asked people to stop tagging him. Effendi, he stressed that player selection should be left to the national team management and the Heritage Malaya project, not social media, because it does harm Malaysia's reputation. Effendi, the agent, cautioned that continuing such rumours could make Malaysia look desperate and harm its football credibility and be more of a mercenary. Now, what's been happening is with heritage, especially in Asia, that you're looking at players, and as the regulations apply, it's Article 6 and 7 which apply, that looking at ancestry. Like I mentioned some of the Irish players, the ancestry playing for England, it's parents and grandparents, and that's where you can play for a national representative team, especially in Asia. And we've seen this. It's called the granny rule. Although it doesn't exist, they call it the granny rule, that you can change association because of a grandparent or a parent where you can get a passport from that country. And that's happening a lot in Asia. Malaysia is one. Philippines, Indonesia, and China, they're also looking for heritage players where a grandparent or a parent has heritage from those countries and holds a passport. Well, in Europe, it's a bit different. We've seen a lot of players who've been there in certain countries for 5 years, or in the league, they might decide to play for a national team where that league's located. I've seen that in Greece. I've even seen one player in Croatia, a Brazilian. So been 5 years in the league, you take a passport. So the naturalisation process varies. Sometimes it's heritage. Sometimes you play a long time and you want to play for that country. But for agents, it's an important issue because a nationality change especially to one of their top players, may give a player a chance, play for a national team or in a regional competition like the European Cup or the World Cup. And this can also benefit future transfers because if you're a national team player, especially if you play for the top 50 or 60 national teams, that really gives you a lot more in terms of evaluation, Jonathan.
I think eligibility rules to play for national teams is a thing that most people who follow football have different opinions on. It's very much a two-way street because it arguably stifles opportunities for true talent developed in a country and also unsettles players and affects their mindset when they're linked to this in many ways, which I think is probably the angle that Effendi's coming from in this article. But then again, why shouldn't a player with a legitimate right to represent a country based on their direct heritage be able to do so, especially if they seemingly have little or no chance to represent the country they would normally claim to be their home nation? But as you said, quite rightly, agents need to be aware of this, as making such decisions can affect a player client's career in so many ways. But we know why some people do this, and many of them, I would say, are agents, whether licensed or not. And the reason why I think they do this is because of the commercial potential for players and agents in markets where the player's salary might not be so high, but the actual eyes on commercial value and image value is potentially quite lucrative. Yes, being an international player raises their profile and potentially leverages their position in future contract negotiations with an employing club. But there are flip sides to such approaches, and many of them not always in the best interest of the client.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we see a trend where players play for a youth team for one national team. They get close to playing an A match, which you can sort of get away with, and then they turn to another country because they may have a dual passport or the heritage, or they're playing in that league being more than 5 years and get citizenship. So various reasons. Just simply, I mentioned Article 8, and I just want to, just for our listeners, to explain how agents need to be aware of the Article 8 of these regulations if a player wishes to change the national teams. And it's really only players who have more than one nationality, so dual passports. Some countries allow it, some countries don't. Have acquired a new nationality, they've been there 5 years, and countries offer citizenship, or are eligible to represent more than one association due to their nationality, can change teams, which could be a heritage because the granny rule, as I said, or they're eligible because of ancestry or something like that. Now, I mentioned that nationality is very huge in Asia, and especially when you reside there a long time. And I've seen in Asia, if you can get an Asian passport, an Australian passport as a European player, we know in Asia, a lot of leagues had the Asian spots. So you had, say, 5 visa players. One was for an Asian spot. So players will look at that and agents will look at that and say, yeah, that's a benefit. But that has been curtailed a little bit. I know South Korea got rid of that recently. So there's no Asian spot there anymore. And some of the other leagues also curtailing that. The other issue, Jonathan, is the dual passport. And I'll just mention with the Australian context, we have a lot of players with EU passports, Italian, Croatian, Greek, Maltese, and UK passports. Being an immigrant nation, a lot of players here, their parents came out from the UK. And these help as an agent. We always ask, and I'm looking at the agent's perspective, if you've got an EU passport or a UK passport, it's not naturalisation in the sense of national teams, but it helps with the working permits and it will assist getting a contract. So a lot of agents have to be across the passports, whereas naturalisation is another layer to amplify opportunities for their players, Jonathan.
Personally, Peter, I just don't want football to walk the same path as other sports have, where sports people can so easily change their nationality and then sometimes even change it back, often based on some tenuous link to a distant relative way back in time, or they've lived and played the sport in a desired country and now qualify to represent that country. And I can see here that the cogs are ticking for you, Peter. And before you say it, I acknowledge the England cricket team have certainly had quite a few players in their time who have had, shall we say, a distinctly South African or Australasian twang to their accent.
We're a football podcast. I don't want to into cricket. Well, we see it in basketball too, players changing nationalities. But let's focus on football. I mean, we just heard that Mason Greenwood was going to play possibly for Jamaica, no longer England. So it's happening at that top level. It's becoming common practice for some players, maybe on the outer, to change nationality or get an opportunity or play in big competitions. Very common. And as I said, Greenwood's one that's just come to the fore right now. And Jamaica have got a lot of good players. And I know with the French teams, I would say Curacao is a small nation in the Caribbean. They have a lot of players in France and can use this heritage. So it's a very interesting area. Now, before we sign off, I just want to mention a few announcements. And I think this first one, Jonathan, is going to pique your interest, although you do know about it. It's the biggie. The FIFA Football Agents Regulation hearing has been scheduled for the 12th of February 2025 at 2:30, I think, Central European Time. The case is known as Whitman and others v FIFA at the European Court of Justice. I'm not just raising because the hearing's on, but it's going to be public, so it's going to be live. My contacts say it probably will be in English, but it could be in German because it's going to be held in Luxembourg. After that hearing, we won't probably have a result. However, we'll see how the submissions go. And from there, we should get a result soon after, especially if it's a public hearing. People will want that final result. I'll mention a few other events that are coming on board. And one was mentioned with our guest from Morocco, Mohamed Rezki. The African Football Agents Conference will be held in Rabat, Morocco, 28th, 29th, and 30th of April. Same time, we've got the Football Forum in Hungary. It's an agents conference, very specific. I think it's a second edition. East meets West is their logo, which I think works really well, and that's on the 29th of April. And another one that's come on board that's been announced, it's not so much a conference, it's the FIFA Executive Program in Agency. If you want to put an application, it's an executive course held by FIFA. It's a second edition. I did the first edition, so I'm in favor of it. But this one, I think you go to Paris, Zurich, and Miami. We can get that chance. That's going to be quite interesting. I will say this, with a lot of the conferences these days, it's not just about lectures and exhibitors. Many conferences now are focused on networking. Some have apps so people can make appointments with each other, and also side events, maybe games on at the same time and all that. So a lot going on in the conference space. We'll keep you updated of all those conferences. And Jonathan, what do you think of the announcement of the FFAR hearing?
Well, all I've got to say to people is grab your popcorn. It could be quite entertaining, but when we get a decision, we do not know. And the interesting thing is, I don't think we've had an Advocate General opinion on this case, which we usually do get from the ECJ. But one announcement from me this week. There is a new book out, and it's not yours this time, Peter. And this is especially for those who particularly enjoyed episode 46 of The Agent's Angle, where our guest was the one and only Barry Silkman. And that episode is proving very popular, so listen back to it, especially if you haven't listened to it already. But Silky now has his book out, which he hadn't finished when we spoke to him, and it's called The Not So Secret Football Agents. And I think it will be a fascinating and also fun read if our chat with Silky is anything to go by, as we chatted to him on so much, a lot of which we had to cut from that episode. Yet I don't think it's out as an audiobook until March, and I hope the audiobook is with Silky narrating it, as it would definitely bring yet more character to it. But then again, Barry may not exactly keep to the script when recording an audiobook.
Yes, I think that's something to look forward to. There's not that many books on football agency, the industry and agents' experiences. So that's something really to look forward to. And yes, Barry was a guest that really provided colour and insights, and very, very interesting episode, as is all our guests. Our socials, we are focused a lot on LinkedIn, where we do put polls and articles and also share our episodes. Please share episodes with others. Send in any questions you like, or topics covered, or guests you'd like to hear from. We're always open to ideas for guests and topics on the agent's angle. As with today, we covered only Morocco, so we're always exploring new areas, new countries, or agents who operate in those countries. So please get in touch. It's a bye from me.
So after 3 back-to-back episodes of The Agent's Angle, we are now scheduled to be back in 2 weeks' time, as normal, on the 16th of February, all being well. And as Peter said, get those questions in, and also the topics, if not territories, you would like to hear covered here on The Agent's Angle. And with that, until the next time, take care of yourselves, and we will speak to you soon.
The purpose of the Agents Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.